To give this piece a bit of context, I have to emphasize how timely it was that Silent Hill Remake came out just as I had been watching through Lynch's catalog. David Lynch is inspirational to me in many ways, with his musical ear, the dark paintings he creates, the thrill rides of his films, and just his general sense of being. A few years back, I watched through the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks, loved it, and then, the last summer, I got a library card and watched Inland Empire. And what a movie it is. It's pretty insane, it feels like an unhinged stroll through a total nightmare, but never has a movie swept me up in all 3 hours of itself before. It's the most extremely vague movie while also making total sense, and that oddness of its art direction reminded me a lot of a certain game series. While it came out after Silent Hill 2 and 3 on PS2, it feels fixated on the liminal horror you'd specifically get the most of in Silent Hill 3. It's also, like a number of his films, a very female movie. Its subtitle is literally A Woman in Trouble, much like the theme of Silent Hill 3, with Heather's pregnancy implications among other terrible things. But this isn't a video about Silent Hill 3, unfortunately. Maybe one day. When I was a single digits kid, the Silent Hill game series was my gateway into thinking critically about a story and a deeper psychological meaning. At the time, I had been playing games like Little Big Planet, Resident Evil 5, and, of course, Ratatouille. Well-rounded, I know. So when I first played the Xbox version of Silent Hill 2, I was totally taken aback. As I got older, I looked more and more into the meaning of things like the dead James in the chair, or why Maria was even in the game and what she stood for. And while a lot of things had explanations, I started to just want more and more of this sort of experience. Something focused on your feelings, not the writers shoving a simplistic metaphor down your throat. With Silent Hill 2 releasing just after the terrorist fear globally brought on by 9/11, it dodged the postmodern lens that most things are dubbed under now. But in Japan, the late 90s and early 2000s still had their cultural and economic hardships that creeped into their media. Nowadays, we almost expect suicide rates and the rise of hikikomoris, but at the time Silent Hill released, this was just starting. If we learned anything from the isolation the world endured during COVID, then we can all remember how dangerously self-reflective we can get, and with the outcasts at Konami all locked away together to create games under the name Team Silent, it's no wonder we got some of the most wildly thoughtful and psychologically challenging games to ever be released. Undoubtedly, there are some major influences for Team Silent rooted in American culture. Every Silent Hill game is based in an American setting. Even though the subjects of grief and guilt are universal, there's still a reason they choose the US. David Lynch is often described as an all-American Midwestern guy who grew up in the prettiest suburbs with the perfect house and family. The American lifestyle is woven into each and every one of his films, though he jumps around from small towns, suburbs, to the overpopulated artificiality of Hollywood. Team Silent always goes for somewhere between the first two, with a lot of world building most comparable to Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet. Now, there are a lot of videos specifically about Twin Peaks and Silent Hill, so I'm actually going to avoid that topic, instead making connections between Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, as well as the intensity and surrealist quality of Lynch's paintings. Masahiro Ito, the art director of Silent Hill 1-3, who famously created the creature designs, has brought up the David Lynch influence many times on Twitter. Recently, he said that Lost Highway's plot was going to be the direction Silent Hill 2 went in, with multiple leads and plots weaving together. This was ultimately rejected by Konami, but the parallels between Lost Highway and Silent Hill 2 are still plentiful. The film Lost Highway is about 2 intersecting stories from the perspective of a bad narrator. One follows Fred and his wife Renee, who have a terribly dull and untrustworthy marriage, while the second plot follows Pete, a mechanic who somehow gets a lot of female attention. Unfortunately for him, one of these women is called Alice, who gets him caught up in a messy situation he can't get out of. The character Fred gets sent videotapes by an elusive third party and learns that he actually killed his wife. James learns in the same way at the end of the game with a VHS tape. Fred creates 2 identities for himself, James and Pyramid Head. Fred creates 2 versions of his wife, Mary and Maria, in the game. Fred represses the fact that he kills, has the guilt of murder, and goes into another world, James in the other world. This loss of awareness actually has a word for it. It's called a psychogenic fugue, And what it means is that the person suffering from it loses key bits of memory in regards to themselves. With all of the movies I mentioned today, the Criterion versions are what I watch them on. Most of the information I've collected on David Lynch is from interviews collected within these special features, and they're a pleasure to watch for a behind-the-scenes fanatic like myself. Rarely does Lynch give any sort of context for his films, which often frustrates critics and audiences who want a story more traditionally laid out with a proper explanation. In the case of Lost Highway, Lynch does give us something. Paraphrasing now, he tells us that his obsession with the O.J. Simpson murder case is what sparked Lost Highway, specifically because O.J. got away with killing 2 women. He wanted to explore what a person who gets to go on in the free world would live like, what they'd think, and how they would rationalize it to themselves. This is again that psychogenic fugue, and in Silent Hill 2, James rationalizes his crime by embracing the town filled with monsters, violent people, innocent people, fake people, and foggy versions of locations he had once been. Sometimes depression is described as seeing the world through foggy eyes, and James literally sees fog almost everywhere he goes, because what was once a happy place has been absolutely tainted. I doubt that when Mary was with him, alive and well in the town, that it looks so foggy. 1 year ago, I made a video that was a semi-review, semi-ramble about Silent Hill Remake, and I brought up one of the new endings called Bliss. Though I've heard this take before, someone left a comment and worded things so well that I have to share it.
The Bliss ending is about James traveling back through his memory. Consider the save point stare he gives the player. Well, the red square could be a recording light. Maria comments on James zoning out. Mary also comments on James zoning out when looking at the camera. Probably glimpsing the red light, James in Lakeview Hotel syncs up his presence with an original memory like a portal from his consciousness. That's why James' voice sounds different initially, as though talking to a screen. Then when he says everything is fine, he's actually there with Mary and no longer in Lakeview Hotel, hence the empty chair. Because he never went to Silent Hill, because Mary never died. She doesn't cough in that ending either, as a symptom of her oncoming illness. They're both spared a tragic fate.
The reaction of James saying that it feels like someone is in his head as he uses the save, coupled with both Maria and Mary taking notice of it, feels yet again like something that happens in Lost Highway. For the first 10 to 20 minutes of the film, the shot compositions are fairly standard, allowing you to experience the movie without it being obvious that it's a movie. When the tapes are introduced, the filming style changes, following Fred on a high dolly, shooting from behind his back. There's even an unsettling moment where more than one shadow follows after him. What Lynch did was make us and Fred very aware that the camera was unbiasedly watching each action he took. The same is happening to James through us, and when both Fred and James get that final death tape, it becomes clear that the journeys were made by their own psyches. They watch themselves the whole time. And because Silent Hill is a game, the endings are influenced by choices we force James into. Does he die by his own hand, live on with Maria, or bypass even killing his wife? Even though we take part in the mystery, the narrative carefully makes sure we do not mess up the fact that James is still the one who did the deed. Anyhow, thanks again to the viewer who commented that. I also find it interesting that both Maria and Mary specifically called the save reaction out. In Lost Highway, Fred is married to Renee, and his alter ego gets entangled with Alice. These characters are played by the same actress, immediately signifying the audience to understand that these women are connected. This is how we feel when we meet Maria as well. James points out that her and Mary look the same, if you haven't already seen Mary's picture in your belongings. Near the movie's end, there's actually a moment where Fred's alter ego asks Alice about a picture, and the way she lazily points at it kind of suggests that something else is going on here, like maybe they're both her. The sexual undertones of Silent Hill 2 is everywhere, from visiting multiple bedrooms in the apartments, the strip club Heaven's Night, to the boldly dressed Maria. One of my favorite examples are the holes James puts his hands or body into with no fear, getting lost in them as he goes through nearly 9 holes by the end of the game. He certainly hasn't been going in any holes while his wife has been sick, and this lack of fulfillment from Mary is why there's so much aggression in James' other self, Pyramid Head. In one of the most overt Lynch homages, the Pyramid Head assault scene takes place while James watches through a closet door, just like the character Jeffrey does in Blue Velvet. The Woodside Apartments is where this happens, but I wonder if the second apartment complex you enter, called Blue Creek, is named in reference to the film as well. Voyeurism's definition is literally explaining the stimulation the person gets from watching others in a sexual situation, and this is the first sign of frustration we outright see James have. The second outright sign is with Maria. Maria is a femme fatale stereotype, popularized in old Hollywood and adapted by Lynch more interestingly in his work. David Lynch uses this stereotype to counteract the softness of the woman, specifically in Blue Velvet with the singer Dorothy, who works at a club, lustful and proud, before coming home entirely stripped down, broken and helpless as things just happen to her. She tries desperately to flirt with the main character again and again, but whether he feeds into it or not, she slowly starts to show more and more of her weaker side. Instead of fulfilling the need of the main character's urges, she starts to rely on him to fulfill her own, realizing by the end that he genuinely doesn't need her and will likely go back to the woman he's actually been invested in since the beginning. This explanation sounds like I could just be talking about Maria, right? That's exactly the point. There's a Making of Silent Hill 2 featurette easily accessible on YouTube that goes into the art design, music, gameplay, and story that people have used as a source to explain away a lot of things when critiquing the game. Interestingly enough, there's been a lot of commentary on Akira Yamaoka's ethics, constantly using samples and loops in his tracks. Check out the video on that by Thor High Heels from 2018 if you want a more in-depth discussion there. When I think of Silent Hill, I think of the music associated with it. The soundtrack transcends the era it came from, even with its pop rock 90s influence. Lost Highway has a soundtrack that feels similarly grounded in 90s pop rock, yet it mixes odd industrial sounds most commonly found in the grunge tracks of Marilyn Manson and Trent Reznor. It's no surprise that Reznor, the Nine Inch Nails singer and Manson collaborator, was the producer of the Lost Highway album. Some of the less guitar-focused tracks in Silent Hill 2 heavily feature noises, scratches and metal, voices and whispers, much like the quiet moments in Lost Highway. I was making these connections when I was thinking about the soundtracks to both the game and film, and laughed when Yamaoka outright said, "Movies didn't inspire my work for the creation of Silent Hill 2. That's just my style." Like, come on. If the entire crew can admit to the influence of cinema, so can you, Yamaoka. Earlier I mentioned the club in Blue Velvet, but there's also one in Lost Highway. There are even apartments, bowling alleys, hotels, and a few other locations that end up in Silent Hill 2. The art direction and vibes are not as comparable, so that doesn't mean that just because they're in a Lynch film is the reason they're in Silent Hill. Honestly, all of these things I'm connecting don't entirely mean anything. I could be saying pointless stuff in this video, and that's the beauty of art and interpretations. Speaking of art, I have to talk about Lynch's paintings. I know that people most often say the monster design and world design of Silent Hill 2 is attributed to the haunting portraits of Francis Bacon, but I'd argue that Lynch's surreal work factored in as well. Lynch started as an oil painter, always most intrigued in expressing the macabre. At some point, he wanted more and more texture. He wanted his pieces to talk, to move, and that's why he went into filmmaking. Now, when we look at his paintings closer, they say things about the psychogenic fugue outright. This is the painting My Head is Disconnected from 1994. That black box with a circle sort of looks like a camera, with outright recording what happens. There's no denying the fact of it, unlike how a memory is bound to change reality. There's a famously quoted line in Lost Highway where Fred says,
"I like to remember things my own way. How I remembered them, not necessarily the way they happened."
James would probably say the same thing, wouldn't he? James filmed only a few things, but I'm sure by the time he filmed the murder of his wife, he probably hated the fact of what a camera can show us. He remembered differently. Untitled from 1970 is a colorful but horribly odd liminal space painting. Liminal spaces are what Lynch most often uses to unsettle us in motion, much like Team Silent does famously. On the left, there's a 3-seater couch suggesting multiple people could have lived in this space together, whereas on the left, it's just a singular seat. The rooms behind these pieces of furniture feel like they're windows into separate pathways or a different way of life. Singular chairs are poignant in Silent Hill 2, with James finding his doppelganger at the apartments, and when he sits in front of the TV at the hotel. In the 80s, he started doing a lot of photography, mostly capturing the look of mechanical things like gas pumps, engines, and cars. These are also the types of things we find as we get into the cold, steely depths of the other world, rusty and used as they smoke up a room. Truly, the way he makes paintings post-Silent Hill 2 feels the most Silent Hill. I'm linking a lot of things below for this video, so if you want to get more into his recent pieces, go for it. One of the most popular joke endings in the history of video games comes in the form of a dog ending, starting with Silent Hill 2, and continuing into Origins and Shattered Memories. With so much inspiration coming from Lynch already, this feels like maybe the most egregious homage. Many Lynch movies feature the presence of a dog, whether on screen or barking up a storm. In his movies, the dog symbolizes a massive change in the direction of the plot. The most poignant example is at the start of Blue Velvet, when the lead character's father has a stroke, setting everything in motion for Jeffrey to come home and be sucked into a mess of intrigue. Of course, the dog ending is just silly, implying that the dog did it all. The dog in Silent Hill is a Shiba Inu, a breed that was discovered nearly 7,000 years ago, used for hunting during the Stone Age. It's a very Japanese dog, one that can always be recognized by its origin from people both in and out of Japan. With hikikomoris and the anti-outdoor movement of young people in Japan starting around the late 1990s, I find it interesting that they use such a deep-rooted breed. It's a dog like that melded with alien technology, a blend of New Age and Stone Age. Maybe it isn't that deep, but I can actually tie this back to Blue Velvet. In quite a few of his movies, the dog shown is a Jack Russell Terrier. This dog actually belonged to David Lynch, and with all of the production costs and issues, I'm sure he used his own dog to dodge paying out. But the origins of a Russell Terrier is very European. The film is one that shows how ideal the American suburbs can be from the outside, pushing that American dream agenda. But in 1986, America was reluctantly celebrating the 200 years of existence while most of society was still reeling over the recent war. The American dream was outrageously American, and the country certainly fought off its European origins by then. So it's interesting that in a movie all about flipping ideals on its head, that breed of dog, a pre-American norm that got melted into the cultural pot, is our first indication that things aren't as they're supposed to be. Both uses of a dog in Blue Velvet and in Silent Hill seem to suggest a lack of connection between the ideal and the surreal and the cultures surrounding them. I've sort of been avoiding the term surreal, something both Silent Hill 2 and Lynch are most often described as. The definition of it is hard to fully grasp, but think of it as making work that's totally free form. There are no rules of how to tell the story, how it's supposed to sound, how it will play, what it looks like, or what it's made with. Surreal works of art are like dreams, something Lynch constantly talks about and expresses in everything he does. When Silent Hill opens, the very first line is,
"In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill."
It fully embraces its surreal quality, suggesting to you that this is all more than a simplistic narrative, nor something that looks like a typical horror game. In theory, it can all be summed up by this one word, surreal. All in all, there are probably a million more parallels I can get into, but I have no brain cells left to be able to articulate ideas anymore. So if you have any fantastic things to say, please do so down below. Thank you all for watching.